When it comes to the most notorious historically inaccurate films of all time, 2001's Enemy at the Gates is constantly ranked as one of the worst, even being dubbed as propagandist at times. It is a film centered on the life of a real highly successful Soviet sniper, Vasily Zaitsev, during the Battle of Stalingrad, but it gets so much information blatantly and even occasionally purposefully wrong that it infuriated real Red Army veterans who called for the film to be banned completely. Even today, decades later, this movie still contributes in spreading misinformation, and there is no better way to combat this than by diving straight into correcting and revealing the true extent of all of its inaccuracies. Right off the bat, without even pressing play, we see two evident errors on the film's cover. First being that, due to it having been flipped, a non-existent left-handed Mosin Nagant rifle is seen. And secondly being the presence of what looks to be a post-war or modern-day scope reticle instead of any period-accurate one used on the Eastern Front in reality. The film opens with a young Vasily Zaitsev and his grandfather Andrei Zaitsev hunting a wolf in the Urals with a rifle that has its barrel so thickly wrapped that it would make it impossible to properly align the sights. The rifle itself also appears to be a sporterized 9130 PU Mosin Nagant. Since this sequence takes place in the 1920s when Zaitsev was a kid, the existence of the rifle at this time is anachronistic, as the base 9130 version was not adopted until 1930. In reality, young Vasily hunted with the Imperial Russian Army surplus single-shot Verdun rifle, specifically a 20-gauge shotgun conversion known as the Verdanka, which he was given at the age of 12 in 1927.
Ready, Vasily? Now, Vasily! Fire, Vasily!
Throughout the film, Vasily is always called by his full first name. However, as is commonplace in Russia, and as noted many times by the actual Vasily Zaitsev himself in his personal autobiography, Notes of a Russian Sniper, his family and friends more often referred to him with diminutives, such as Vasya. We are then brought inside a train carriage on its way to Stalingrad in September 1942, where a now adult Soviet soldier Vasily is treated as if he is an underprepared fresh recruit, possibly even a conscript, and as indicated by his lack of rank insignia on both his greatcoat and tunic, which we get a better look at later, he is depicted to be a private. This is far from the truth. Vasily had joined the Soviet Navy's Pacific Fleet in 1937, where he served for 5 years before volunteering to become an infantryman and fight in Stalingrad completely on his own accord. Through his service in the Navy, he had reached the rank of Chief Petty Officer, which translated to the Army equivalent of Senior Warrant Officer or Sergeant Major when he became a part of the Red Army upon arriving to Stalingrad, meaning he should be wearing the correlating rank insignia to show this, and of course should know what he is doing and not look like a complete inexperienced ghoul. In addition, the movie depicts Vasily's surrounding comrades in much the same way, and treats them as if they all do not know each other. Vasily's detachment in reality consisted of fellow sailors, some of whom he was friends with, and all of whom also requested land combat duty on their own accord. Vasily even trained with them for a number of days before crossing the Volga in reality. Vasily describes in his notes how while on their train ride to Stalingrad, he and his comrades in his detachment still wore their full naval uniforms, including black pea coats, bell-bottoms, Talyanska and berets. Vasily iconically was a short king, standing at 5 feet 3 inches, much shorter than the 5 foot 10 inch stature of Jude Law, the actor who plays him in the film. The train carriages Vasily took from Vladivostok towards Stalingrad was described as being a lot nicer, likely in part due to him being an officer, with it having benches and even trained personnel on board delivering food. One of the carriages was even noted as having private passenger compartments and contained the division's headquarters along with a hospital and surgery. The train that detaches and departs from the carriage is a German DRG Class 80. This locomotive only saw use in German territory and would not see any sort of Soviet use until after the war, when some of them saw service with the East German Deutsche Reichsbahn. The locomotive that arrives to replace the older one is actually yet another German train, being a Kriegslok war locomotive, specifically either the DRB 42 or 52 class. Captured Kriegsloks were also not used by the Soviet railways until after the war, and even then they were used mainly in the Baltic and border states, not Russia. Both mentioned classes of captured German Kriegslocks were classified TL and TE by the Soviet railways respectively. The Kriegslock hauling the troop train is classified NS in the movie, however. There are T-34-85 turrets on top of one of the train cars. This was unlikely to have existed and surely anachronistic for the time period, since the T-34-85 tank was not introduced until 2 years later in 1944. The soldiers are depicted as being locked inside the train wagons. This was neither practical nor historically accurate. In reality, train doors were kept unlocked so that soldiers could rapidly leap out to defend the train in case of an attack. The animated map shows a completely distorted version of Germany's annexation of Europe, with it even incorrectly depicting the neutral nations of Switzerland, Spain and Turkey falling under German occupation, when none of these nations were invaded by them in reality. The film's map also fails to depict the 1939 Soviet invasion of Poland and shows what appears to be a modern map of Russia, the Baltic states and Ukraine as independent countries, when all of these areas were annexed by the USSR as territories before the German invasion. The troop train arrives near the Volga River, where the emergent soldiers can see Stalingrad city right in front of them. At this time, the rail lines ended miles from the east bank of the Volga, and they would have either marched or ridden in carts or trucks to the river crossing area. In the specific case of Vasily's unit, he did take a train towards Stalingrad, but had to disembark it after they ran into a destroyed bridge. They then marched towards the Volga, where they performed combat training for 3 days, before then being driven in trucks and marching to the area where their boats would dock to pick them up. The 2nd Battalion of the 1047th Regiment of the 284th Rifle Division, that Vasily was a part of in reality, crossed the Volga River on the night of the 21st to the 22nd of September, not in the daylight nor on September 20th as shown in the film. It is worth mentioning that although most of the river crossings by the Soviet faction were conducted at night, around this time there was actually a risky daylight crossing, on either September 14th or 15th, performed by the 13th Guards Rifle Division, which was conducted under the cover of smokescreens and ended up with the Soviets sustaining a considerable amount of losses in the process, similar to what we see in the movie, making it possible that the filmmakers based this scene on this particular daytime crossing instead. But regardless, this would still obviously be wrong, as it involved a different division and was on a different day. Vasily and his forces at this point would indeed have been given infantry uniforms prior to entering the city. However, all of them are seen wearing either winter greatcoats or wool padded jackets, even though the cold temperatures of autumn had not started coming in yet. Vasily's memoir even mentions how it was actually warm and stuffy around this time, so much so that some of them took off their fatigues and wished to go swimming to cool down. Overall, much more of them should instead still be wearing less heavier clothes, such as the M35 tunic as seen in historical photographs, including this one of Zaitsev himself taken in October of 1942. Even after they received said infantry uniforms, Vasily and his peers still wore badges of the Pacific Fleet and continued to wear their blue and white Navy Italianskas under their fatigues, which they were mentioned as fully revealing at times when some of them took off their fatigue shirts. But once again, none of this is shown or even mentioned at all in the film. Vasily and pretty much all of his fellow comrades are seen wearing only Pilotka caps, when they should at least have a proper mix with the SSH-40 helmets at this point. The soldiers are still all shown as being unarmed, with a severe lack of web gear, ammunition, bayonets and other such gear and munitions. They would have been issued all this prior to crossing the Volga. Vasily and his comrades are depicted as getting shouted at, physically dragged and pulled into the combat as if they are cattle. This is yet another one of the film's dramatizations. The actual Vasily describes how the commanders and political officers of his infantry battalion greeted his unit warmly upon meeting them, and how he got on well with and even joked with some of them at times. Vasily himself even had to take charge whenever he found that he was the highest ranking soldier among his forces. The depicted mad rush into the battle is also inaccurate, as in reality Vasily and his comrades had to wait a number of hours at the docking area for nightfall to come and additional soldiers of the 2nd Battalion to arrive before their boat came, which they then had to load supplies onto while sailors chalked the many holes and leaks it had sustained and used pumps to remove water before sailing. On the dock and in some other scenes of the film, we spot 10.5cm Leichtefeld Haubitz 1840s, a German howitzer which did not enter service until 1943 after the Stalingrad battle.
Listen to these letters sent by Russian mothers to their sons on the front.
There is no actual evidence to show that blocking detachment officers would read to the soldiers crossing the Volga in such a manner as this. The Soviet barrages are seen attacked by Junka's Ju-87B Stukas, which despite not having them physically on them, can still somehow be heard having the iconic Jericho trumpets. Jericho trumpets were immediately phased out of service by the end of 1940, due to them having quickly lost most of their intimidation factor and becoming little more than a warning to the enemy that they were about to be attacked. The soldiers being shot by the Stukas are depicted as if they are just receiving small arms fire, when the MG-17 machine gun shells of the aircraft would have literally torn their bodies apart, much more violently than what we see here. Zaitsev's unit in actuality made it across the river without any attacks or casualties, meaning there should be no German artillery or mortar bombardments, no Stuka attacks, and definitely no Soviet officers shooting at their own fleeing soldiers. There was a flare that possibly belonged to the Soviets which was fired over them, but that was about it in reality. The film portrays our characters landing at the dock or ferry crossing areas in the central part of the city, and then heading right into the middle of the battle where they remain fighting for most of the first half of the movie. In actuality, most of the 284th Rifle Division's personnel were sent to the Mamaev Kurgan and Krutry Ravine, while specifically for Zaitsev's unit, they landed in friendly territory at the Red October factory area before moving southwards.
The one with the rifle shoots! The one without follows him! When the one with the rifle gets killed, the one who is following picks up the rifle and shoots!
Logistical issues did exist in the Red Army forces in the Battle of Stalingrad, particularly for the aforementioned 284th Rifle Division that did encounter a shortage of rifles. However, this occurred during their river crossing into the city on the night of the 21st only, and even then was far from the extent of shortages shown in the film. The division successfully accomplished their initial objectives despite these issues, and as aforementioned, the Soviet forces were issued ammunition and weaponry before they crossed the Volga, not after. Also note that we are talking about the regular soldiers here and not the militia units participating in the battle. It's not the beginning of Operation Barbarossa anymore, where the Red Army did encounter these kinds of supply issues. The Soviets really gave everything they had to defend Stalingrad at all costs. In general, these kinds of details shown in movies and certain video games are over-exaggerated and should not be considered the norm for the Battle of Stalingrad. Even the real Vasily himself did not mention encountering any such severe munition problems in his memoirs. Vasily is handed a ammo clip and instructed to become a rifleman via scavenging a Mauser Nagant rifle from a falling comrade. In reality, Zaitsev entered the battle as a submachine gunner, having already been armed with both a drum mag fed SMG, likely a PPSH-41, and a pistol, likely a TT-33, with grenades also being available to them. At this stage of the battle, the munition storages we see around the docks would normally have been kept deeper inland or hidden underground to prevent them from being destroyed by German artillery or mortar bombardments and air raid attacks. Although there was an exceptional accidental case that happened on September 18th and the 20th, where ammunition crates left on the shore unintentionally were destroyed by German artillery and mortar fire, but even this happened in quote midst of the confusion of the night, not day. As a matter of fact, the deployment of any trucks near the shore would be very unlikely at this stage of the battle, as General Kulikov of the 62nd Army stated himself, quote, "We had neither horses nor trucks on the right bank of the Volga, as there was nowhere to hide them from bullets, bombs and shells." When our characters reach the center of the city, we see a large merry-go-round behind them, which is almost certainly fictional as there are no sources showing such a thing to ever be in this part of Stalingrad at this time. Also, although these following examples are most likely due to the film's set limitations, it is still worth pointing out the strange ahistorical appearance of what seems to be a red wooden partition, a red and black gable-roofed building, and an otherwise noticeable lack of other buildings that should be in the background skyline. Predominantly shown in this square, we can see a large Stalin statue that seems to be based on the one in front of the Museum of the Defense of Tsaritsyn, which used to be known as Reknikova House, situated on the opposite side of railway station number 1 and nearby the House of Communal Workers. However, the real statue is much smaller than the one seen in the film. In the middle of the square is also the iconic Barmely fountain, which predominantly features in a later scene. The portrayal in the movie, however, has 9 kid statues around a crocodile, while the real fountain had only 6. Plus, the real fountain is supposed to be located in front of Stalingrad 1 station, which is known today as railway station number 1, not located in the middle of the square. The store that features many times throughout the movie is definitely based on the real-life Univermag department store, located near the Square of the Fallen Fighters in reality. When we combine the existence of this ridiculously large Stalin statue, a fictional version of the Barmely fountain, and this department store, it points out to us that this location is either a fictional one with many unique Stalingrad landmarks combined into one place, or is by far one of the worst portrayals of the Square of the Fallen Fighters to ever exist in any kind of media. Yup, including certain video games that directly took inspiration from this scene, particularly some of the Call of Duty games we have covered before. Speaking of video games, although Vasily Zaitsev may be one of the most famous allied snipers in our world, in an alternate universe out there, the iconic sniper Harry Hawker is the ultimate bane of Axis foe in the upcoming video game Sniper Elite Resistance, our gracious sponsor. As you would expect from the award-winning Sniper Elite series, this game will offer unparalleled sniping mechanics, stealth and tactical third-person combat, huge agency and how you complete your missions with optional kill lists, targets, multiple infiltration and extraction points, and side missions, a full-length standalone campaign playable in both single-player and co-op, with authentic World War II weapons, and the trademark X-ray kill cam, with multiplayer and invasion mode also being brought back. Sniper Elite Resistance also introduces propaganda missions, a brand new style of side mission to the series where you become a resistance fighter. The game is launching on January 30th, 2025, and can be pre-ordered now, available day 1 to Xbox Game Pass, and will be available both digitally and physically on Xbox Series X and S, Xbox One, PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 4, Windows PC and PC via Steam and the Epic Games Store. Those who pre-order Sniper Elite Resistance using my exclusive link in the description will receive a bonus campaign mission called Target Führer and more. If you pre-order the deluxe edition, you will get the game 2 days early with the season pass included. So don't miss the opportunity. Pre-order today using my link in the pinned comment and the top of the video's description. Now, back to the inaccuracies. Some of the German Kart 98K rifles have anachronistic late World War II front barrel bands. Mass charge attacks like this were unlikely to be utilized in Stalingrad, with the films depicted one being completely fabricated in general. Open squares such as the one depicted here were few and far between, and most of the actual fighting was done street to street, often with entire battles taking place within a single building. Vasily's first combat in reality was much different, as it was an assault on German emplacements around huge petrol tanks in the city's factory district, and ended successfully for his forces, in complete contrast to what the film shows. This Maxim MG has a snow cap that wasn't introduced until 1943. Although these half-tracks look like the SDKFZ251 AUC at first glance, taking a closer look at aspects such as the front plate hinges and steel tracks show us that they are actually a post-World War II Czech successor model known as the OT-810. We see the Wehrmacht using 1960s era Swiss Panzer 61s that have been modified to look like German Panzer III medium tanks. These Panzer III wannabes are the only German tanks seen throughout the film, although the majority of tanks used by panzer divisions within the 6th Army were indeed Panzer III variants. If this square is actually based on the Square of the Fallen Fighters, then the existence of these considerable amounts of Panzer IIIs in the city centres would be very unlikely. The German division that first arrived in the city centre and the square on September 14th was the 71st Infantry Division. They lost the square to the Soviets on that night, but managed to recapture it on September 21st. Thus, these Panzer IIIs should be replaced by Stug 3 variants, particularly the Stug 3 Auf F and earlier models used by the 244th Sturmgeschütz Battalion that were attached along with the 71st Infantry Division during the battles. While the MG42 actually saw limited use in Stalingrad, the film depicts the common error of showing the weapon with the post-1943 vertical charging handle, instead of the period-appropriate and rare slab-sided horizontal handle. Overall, the guns themselves should mostly be replaced by MG34s anyway. Even worse, the MG42 is given a pathetic firing sound. Here's what we hear in the film versus reality. The scenes depicting officers mowing down line after line of retreating soldiers with machine gun fire is both inaccurate and impractical. It is quite a well-known fact nowadays that Stalin's not one step back order number 227 is portrayed in certain movies and games in an over-exaggerated manner. Soviet troops could retreat if they were allowed to do so, and the order was mainly aimed at officers. Executions did happen in the Red Army, but scarcely in a manner such as shown here. For most of the cases, they just tried to send fleeing soldiers back to the front, or they even retreated along with them. As in the Battle of Stalingrad, during the September period of the battle, a considerable number of people who disobeyed orders were shot and arrested, but a majority of them were just sent back to the front. There is also a report on September 14, 1942, that one of the detachments opened fire above the heads of retreating soldiers in order to force them back to their previous defensive positions, but never all directly at them. And even to further drive this point home, the notes of the real Zaitsev never mention anything like this happening, or of him even interacting with blocking detachments at all. The TT-33 pistol is seen having the finer cocking serrations, indicating it to be a later post-1947 and thus anachronistic variant. This upcoming scene starts with an appearance of a German civilian commercial 1938 Opel Kadett car being driven by one of our Soviet characters, Danilov. The importation of foreign cars at this time were very limited in the USSR, so why it has a Russian license plate and how such a non-military used German vehicle even got here in the middle of Stalingrad is anyone's guess. Radial all-season tires are seen. Although patented in 1915, radial tires were not used on vehicles until the 1960s. From certain angles, it can be clearly seen that the lenses of Danilov's and other soldiers' spectacles throughout the movie have modern anti-reflective coating. Some of the German soldiers are seen wearing M43 tunics, which is certainly anachronistic for the Stalingrad setting. It should be the M40 instead. Apart from rubber bands and net covers attached on the German helmets, a few Germans throughout the film also wear a helmet cover with a camo that looks to be worn out or dirty splinter tarn camo, which was unlikely to have been used in this battle. It should be replaced by Hungarian camo, captured Soviet Amoba, Hessinian or other field-made cloth covers instead. One of the Heer soldiers is wielding an MP41, an SMG which was mostly used by the Waffen-SS and Special Police Forces. Although its existence among other units is possible in exceptional cases, for Heer or army troops, particularly in the Battle of Stalingrad, it's rather unlikely, especially considering that just around 26,700 of them were ever created in reality. The MP41, MP40 and the MP38 are all depicted with ridiculously fast fire rates and inaccurate sounds. This is what we hear in the film versus what they sound like in reality. We can see warm moisture from our characters breathing air, as if the weather is getting cold already. However, as mentioned earlier, the weather at Stalingrad did not start getting anyway cold until at least September 22nd onwards.
Did you notice you? A little.
This is quite an out of character and much too humble response for Zaitsev to have. In reality, upon being questioned on his weapon accuracy, even by higher ranking officials, he would almost always respond in a more confident and bold manner, such as saying, quote, "I guarantee that I'm already a better shot than you." The film depicts the event that made Zaitsev into a sniper being him killing 5 Germans, 2 of which being officers, who are for some reason standing completely exposed in an area where a battle just happened, one of which takes a shower. What? Anyway, in reality, it was his shooting of 3 soldiers, 1 machine gunner and 2 loafers that got the praises and attention of the commanders and of the general staff. Not to mention that this event occurred during the following month of October, very much so not in the first day of arriving in Stalingrad in late September as portrayed here.
Danilov. Political officer.
A politruk Danilov is actually briefly mentioned in Vasily's memoir, but only a couple of times, then as merely just an acquaintance to him. The close friendship and cooperation they are depicted as forming in the film never happened. Danilov describes himself as being assigned in the
21st Infantry.
However, we cannot find this particular unit anywhere during the fight on September 20th in the very central parts of the city. The closest similarity to this would be the 21st Army that had participated since the early phase of the battle, but only on the northern flank far from the city at this stage. There was also the 21st Sapper Brigade of the 7th Sapper Army, and the 21st NKVD Rifle Brigade that mopped up the remaining German forces that were still fighting and hiding in the factory districts around February 2nd, but we can't find any information regarding their involvement in the fight for the city centre at this time either. Printing presses like the one depicted in the movie work by pressing linked metal characters on individual pieces of paper. This creates creases and smudges along the print, yet the pamphlets that Danilov shows Vasily are way too neat and clean, and close-ups show a smooth edge on each letter, something that can only be achieved with modern laser printers.
A young shepherd boy from the Urals.
Zaitsev keeps getting referred to as a shepherd from the Urals throughout the film. In reality, Vasily never called himself or mentioned being referred to as a shepherd in such a capacity. He and his family would have instead been known as hunters or foresters. Nikita Kruschev, famous for becoming the leader of the USSR after Stalin, is depicted first arriving in Stalingrad on September 22nd, 1942.
My name is Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev. I've come to take things in hand here.
Whereas in reality, he reached the Stalingrad front during the previous month of August. Such a daytime Volga crossing on September 22nd simply did not happen. Throughout the movie, Nikita Khruschev is portrayed as a very important commander during the battle. In reality, he served as a political commissar and advisor in the army, and had only a minor role in the battle. Not to mention how, for whatever reason, the movie does not at all show or even mention any actual important Soviet generals, such as Vasily Zhukov, who literally commanded the 62nd Army that Zaitsev was a part of.
I carried out my orders. I sent in all of my boys. But the Germans engulfed us.
Perhaps you'd prefer to avoid the red tape.
There are no reports of any Soviet generals losing their lives in such a self-applying way as this during the battle. This general seems to be a completely fictional one, added simply to dramatize Khrushchev's cruelness. After this, the film then continues to somewhat deservice Nikita Khrushchev and the other Soviet officers, by portraying them as ruthless commanders unable to recognize the importance of troops' morale.
You. What's your suggestion?
Shoot all the other generals who have retreated. And their chiefs of staff too.
Make some examples. Deport the families of the deserters.
That's all been done.
With Danilov being depicted as the only one who understands the relevance of heroes as morale boosters.
Give them hope!
Here the men's only choice is between German bullets and ours. But there's another way. The way of courage. The way of love of the motherland. We must publish the army newspaper again. We must tell magnificent stories. Stories that exalt sacrifice, bravery. What we need are heroes.
Do you know any heroes around here?
Yes, comrade. I know one.
In reality, Soviet leaders did understand the need for such things. They were very effective users of propaganda, and were constantly trying to find, exaggerate, or downright fabricate such examples of heroism. And Vasily Zaitsev was not the first of, nor the only one of them.
That's your job. As political officers, I'm counting on you.
The actual commissars and other political officers were members of and wore the uniforms of the army, not of the NKVD as shown in the film. The freshly printed newspapers have Vasily's story on the front page, which Danilov says will be seen by the general staff. The newspaper's date tells us that the scene takes place on September 25th, 1942. Vasily did not start receiving any such fame, or was first interviewed or had a newspaper article written on him that ended up being seen by the Department of General Staff until much later. As of September 25th, in actuality, he had only just entered the battle 3 days ago and was still serving as a fairly unknown submachine gunner. Danilov has just received a promotion to senior lieutenant, but still wears the old 1940 to 1941 rank insignia to represent this. He and at least a majority of the Red Army soldiers should be wearing the M35 uniforms, with the newer subdued version of the insignia of rank at this point in the war. Even worse, the patches have a black piping that is a feature of enlisted ranks, not officers.
They're going to reprint our article everywhere, in the Caucasus, in the Crimea.
The Crimean Peninsula fell to the Germans in June of 1942, before the fighting in Stalingrad started.
Khrushchev loved the article. He's promoted me to the general staff. And you, to Sniper Division.
As just earlier mentioned, Vasily was still serving as a submachine gunner at this time, and did not become a sniper or even first receive his sniper rifle until mid-October, not late September. Also, Vasily was ordered to become a sniper by CO Major Metalev, under the command of their divisional commander, Polkovnik Nikolai Batyuk, not Kruschev.
Tomorrow morning, Stalin himself will be sitting over breakfast, reading my words, memorizing your name.
The person who wrote the article that got the general staff talking about Zaitsev was not Danilov. IRL Vasily claimed it was a journalist by the title of Captain Ivan Grigorov. A man by the name of Alyosha Afanasayev is also noted to have written newspaper articles on Zaitsev as well, but of course none of these figures are mentioned in the movie. All of the sniper versions of the Mosin Nagant rifles in this film have PU scopes. The prominent use of this throughout the movie is inaccurate, as the application of this scope on the Mosin Nagant did not begin occurring until at least October 1942. Historical evidence and pictures of Vasily dated 1942 show that during the battle he and other Soviet soldiers predominantly used another type of scope, the pre-war PE or PEM type. It is likely that the filmmakers based Vasily's and the other forces rifles on Zaitsev's actual one in the Stalingrad History Museum, but this was a mistake on their part, as the one in the museum was not used by Vasily until later in the war after the Stalingrad battle. When Vasily started his own sniper school and received more snipers in his unit, one of the common tactics he used was known as the Sixes. This tactic involved 6 soldiers who would be divided into 3 pairs of shooters and spotters, who would comprehensively cover the same zone from different firing directions. However, throughout the movie, Vasily only tags along with 1 or 2 fellow snipers during his missions, and sometimes even just goes by himself.
Sasha! Drop that right now.
Sasha Filippov was a real person present in Stalingrad and was indeed a Soviet spy, but he was 17 years old during the battle, much older than he is portrayed in the film. Also, there is no evidence to show that Vasily ever worked with or even met Sasha Filippov as the film depicts. Sasha's mother, who is also based on a real person, is referred to as Mrs. Filippov.
From all over the country, Mrs. Filippov.
Filippov cannot be a married woman's surname in Russia, meaning she should instead be referred to as Mrs. Filippova. Vasily is depicted as having major literary problems.
Thank you for your letter of praise. Praise. R-A-I-S-E.
However, the real Vasily was perfectly literate. Before arriving at Stalingrad, he had attended elementary schooling, graduated from accounting courses and military economic school, and worked as the head of the financial part of the Pacific Fleet. Although the narrative around her is debated, Tanya Chernova does seem to have been a real person who fought in Stalingrad, as outlined in a number of sources. These show that Tanya did indeed fight alongside Vasily as one of his sniper school students, but she was living in America and traveled to the USSR to see her family members in Belarus before becoming a soldier after the German invasion, whereas she is portrayed as a local of Stalingrad in the film.
It's alright, it's our neighbor. Tanya's like a daughter to me. She used to take care of Sasha when I worked at the factory.
The black base color and red piping of Tanya's color tabs indicate her as being a part of either an armored or artillery unit, whereas she was only ever said to have been an infantrywoman of the 284th Division during the Stalingrad battle in actuality. She was noted to have been blonde, rather than the darker hair she has in the film. She is also depicted as being a fresh recruit and holds the rank of private throughout the film, in contrast to how she had been fighting since 1941 as a partisan in Belarusia and the Ukraine before arriving at Stalingrad and reached the rank of sergeant in reality.
She studied German at the university.
Which university?
Moscow.
There is no evidence that Tanya ever attended Moscow University, and she most certainly would not have the time to, since she joined the military recently after she arrived in the Soviet Union. She was instead noted to have studied medicine with desires to become a doctor. Tanya is depicted throughout the film as a kind, good-mannered woman, whereas in reality, largely due to the Germans having killed or displaced all her family members in Belarus, she was instead reputed to have had a violent, even murderous temper. For years after the war, she still referred to German soldiers as sticks worth nothing more than breaking. Her sniping skills are also quite underestimated in the film, as despite her having killed at least 24 Germans in reality, throughout the film Tanya is never seen killing any enemies at all. As a matter of fact, none of the female snipers seen throughout the movie are seen killing anyone. A couple of very questionable foreign weapons appear among the Soviets in this film, the first and most notable being this rifle, which is seen briefly held by Tanya here and later reappears in the hands of one of Vasily's comrades, Volodya. It looks to be either a combination of the Mosin 9130 with different German Mauser rifle parts, or is just the Polish WZ 919823 or WZ 919825 carbine. The second rifle of note would be the Finnish Mosin Nagant seen here wielded by a Soviet sailor. There is a very slight chance that both of these weapons are captured ones, but overall it really does not make sense to see them in this setting. A standard issue Mosin, or at the very least some captured proper German weapons, would be more appropriate.
Your offer to name your mine after me is a great honor.
We could not find any evidence of any mines being named after Zaitsev during this time, especially considering that he was not this famous yet by October as the film tries to indicate. The real Vasily only mentions receiving letters during the battle from family and friends, such as one he received from his past fellow sailors of the Pacific Fleet. Here we are introduced to Major Konig, the film's main antagonist, who our characters tell us this about him later.
It seems he's come all the way from Berlin to stop you.
He's a major in the Wehrmacht. He's director of their sniper school in Zossen.
A Major Konig is actually mentioned in Vasily's memoir with the same story. However, it is very likely that the entire existence of Major Konig is fictional, as there is no evidence from the German side of his existence. His identity was likely fabricated as a piece of Soviet propaganda, having probably been inspired by some of the actual German snipers that Zaitsev encountered and defeated during the battle. The one ribbon that Major Konig wears on his ribbon bar is a non-combat version of the commemorative medal for World War I veterans. Not only is it unlikely that an ace World War II sniper would have been a non-combatant in World War I, but Konig also wears a combatant's World War I Iron Cross ribbon through the buttonhole of his tunic, directly contradicting the ribbon bar. It was imperative for military headquarters to maintain as much anonymity as possible, so as not to give up their location to the enemy, meaning that there would be in no case an entire battalion of panzers parked outside it. Likely due to having been flipped, when we look at the first four of these tanks on the left, the position of their gunner port and visor flap are swapped. The visor covers are also way too large. Here we see a downed Cybele SI-204, a medium transport and trainer aircraft which is being seen used here as a stand-in for a much more common Heckler HE-111 bomber. The filmmakers even altered the Cybele's twin-tail design into a single one to further match the HE-111. It is in fairness a creative and decent attempt to work around prop and filming limitations, but it is still inaccurate nonetheless. Plus there is no evidence of any bomber wreckage ever being outside the Univermag department store, or in this area of the Square of the Fallen Fighters as a whole anyway. This scene shows Vasily beginning his duel with Major Konig on either October 21st or 22nd. As previously mentioned, Vasily had only just became a sniper around this time, and had not gained much fame yet. To match with reality in any sense, it should be taking place later in the battle. The area they are fighting in is the department store sector in the square area. However, we can clearly see and hear intense fighting going on around them in the background, with one of Zaitsev's teammates even telling him the following.
So far this morning, he's knocked off 5 officers, plus 2 machine gunners.
This all does not match up, as this entire area, particularly the Univermag department store, had been captured by the Germans since September 26th and remained fairly uncontested in their control until the very end of the battle. After Vasily fires at this German dummy, he cycles the bolt of his rifle and a fully intact round is ejected, despite the round having been fired seconds beforehand. It could also be a spent blank round with the burnt crimped end blown open, but this too would of course be inaccurate. During World War II, both the German and Soviet forces used the same type of scope reticle, being the German number 1 and number 4, but the filmmakers apparently wanted to make it different for both sides and so present us with this fictional reticle for the Germans. The single-claw Kar-98K Mauser sniper used by Major Konig didn't actually come into production until mid to late 1943. The German HE-111Hs seen here would not bomb this low to the ground, especially over a city like this. The explosion blasts would damage the planes themselves at this altitude.
The Little Shepherd from the Urals receives a new sniper's rifle, a Mosin Nagant 7.62 with its 3.5 power PU telescope.
While the rifle name Mosin Nagant is and was used in Western literature, it was not used to describe the rifle in Russia until long after the war. The weapon was referred to simply as the Mosin rifle at this time by them. This scene shows Vasily crossing the Volga again to a Soviet headquarters at a landing zone to attend a banquet and press conference. This never happened. In reality, he stayed fighting in Stalingrad for most of the battle, only being extracted out of the city after receiving a shrapnel injury in January of 1943. It is apparent by the flame that Vasily is using a butane lighter. Butane lighters were not invented until the 1950s. Vasily has apparently received promotions, as he is now seen having the rank insignia for sergeant. This did not occur in reality. Vasily still retained the rank of senior warrant officer or sergeant major at this time. The rank insignia itself is also missing the red stripes for whatever reason, and just like it was with Danilov, it is the outdated 1940 to 1941 version of rank insignia, instead of the newer subdued one.
Kulikov studied under Metzosin before the war. He knows all his tricks. From now on, he'll go with you everywhere.
Nikolai Kulikov is based on a real soldier, who Vasily mentioned many times in his personal notes as being one of his sniper students who he was close with. In the film, however, the roles are flipped, as Kulikov is incorrectly depicted as the teacher to Vasily. There were a few main figures who helped train Zaitsev to become a sniper in reality. These included Alexander Kalantayev, who was actually the one who started the sniper movement in Stalingrad, along with others such as Starzy Lieutenant Bolshapov and Galanfan Abzalin. Of course, none of these important figures are seen or even mentioned in the film though. Kulikov's collar tabs show him to be a private throughout the film, even though Vasily refers to him as a sergeant in his autobiography.
She's been transferred.
Tanya never became a German message decoder, as there is no evidence that she studied or even spoke German. When Vasily and Danilov arrive at the banquet and press conference with Khrushchev, the Soviet national anthem can be heard playing in the background.
Put your cap back on, you look more heroic.
This anthem was not adopted until early 1944, and the lyrics are the rewritten de-Stalinized 1970s version, making it anachronistic on 2 accounts. Vasily never met with Nikita Khruschev during this time. The only comparable meeting that Vasily actually had with a high-ranking Soviet leader around this time was on the morning of October the 16th, when he met Vasily Chukov himself, the commander of the 62nd Army. The film often shows vast expanses of empty and quiet ruins within Stalingrad, particularly when Zaitsev and Konig are hunting each other, and despite being on the front lines, there are only rare occasions of them being interrupted by intense fighting around them. This would have not been the case for the Battle of Stalingrad. It was the bloodiest battle in human history and saw hundreds of thousands of soldiers fighting crammed into an area of only a few square miles. The real Vasily even mentioned in his memoir of how the enemy snipers they faced used the many explosions, gunfire and other surrounding sounds to hide their shots of their rifles. Our characters sometimes use Western terms, such as here when they describe the Germans with the word Kraut.
Of course, those were the days when we were friends with the Krauts.
This would not be accurate for the region. The most common nickname for the Germans that the Soviets used at this time was Fritz. As you may have noticed, there are also many other strange contradictions and inconsistencies with language in this film as well. Pretty much all of our characters speak English with the actors' original accents, which is understandable since this is a movie made for Western audiences, and we can assume that everything has just been translated for ease of watching. However, what does not match up are the instances such as in this scene where we hear Soviet forces speaking untranslated Russian, or how almost all the writing is still in Russian or German for some reason. On top of this, almost all the main German characters speak English.
My army is not designed for this kind of fighting.
But most of the background ones speak German. And we even sometimes hear German and Russian characters somehow communicating perfectly with each other, such as when Major Konig speaks with Sasha.
I know how he leaves the shelter. He goes to the tractor factory.
The tractor factory is big.
Or when he talks with Volodya here.
On which floor?
I don't know.
We'll see about that.
From here to the wire, 160 meters, right?
155.
The magnification of the sniper scopes is often exaggerated throughout the film. With only a 3.5 times magnification, a target like this telephone line at this distance would be barely visible, let alone present so largely in the scope.
After the Germans invaded us, it wasn't the same atmosphere anymore.
Threw my ass in prison. What were you doing in Germany, huh? Excuse me, says I, but it was Comrade Stalin who sent me there. Don't bring our glorious leader into your treachery. Confess, spy bastard, confess! And bang! Bang, bang, bang! Well, there wasn't a sickle, but there was a hammer. And bang. Knocked out all my teeth. That's right, boy. Have no illusions. That's the land of socialism and universal bliss for you.
Vasily's notes mention nothing of Kulikov's disliking rants of the Soviet state and ideology, nor the presented story in the film. This was most certainly a case of the filmmakers fabricating this all up to shove their own political views in here, which when you consider how they are using Kulikov, a real person, as a vessel to do this, is really quite disrespectful, considering that there is no evidence to show that he shared any such ideals. Kulikov was not killed at this point in the battle. He was alive and still fighting alongside Vasily all the way up until at least January of 1943.
You're Jewish, aren't you?
There's nothing in our religion that says you can't eat sturgeon.
Adult sturgeon lacks scales, so would actually be considered a kosher and would in fact be forbidden by both Danilov and Tanya's Jewish religion. In addition, there is no evidence to even show that Tanya or Danilov were Jewish in actuality. The film now tells us that it is November 5th, 1942, with the depicted duel with Konig having been shown earlier as starting on either October the 21st or 22nd, meaning that the duel between them has been going on for at least 2 weeks now, whereas the actual Vasily only ever claimed that the duel lasted 4 days in reality. This part of the film shows the Soviets fighting in the tractor factory area on November 5th. However, the factory had already been completely captured by the Germans since October 15th, with there being no such Soviet assault on it during this time. Vasily did claim to have performed a similar blinding trick on an enemy sniper in reality. However, it was performed with a mirror from an artillery scope, not a piece of window glass, which would be quite hard to get such a reflection from anyway. It was also done by one of his students, Gorazayev, not Tanya, and the enemy they blinded was just a random German sniper who was taking cover behind a train car outside the factory, which they also managed to successfully kill, not just wound. Vasily shoots Konig in the hand with his rifle, leaving only a small hole. The high-powered 7.62x50 round that the Mosin Nagant fires should have severely mutilated and disabled Konig's hand, yet he is somehow still able to pretty effectively overcome the injury and use the hand throughout the rest of the story.
His father's dead. His mother too.
Does he talk about his father?
No. He didn't know him.
This is just not true at all. During the battle, Vasily's grandfather, father and mother were still alive and living in the Urals. And for whatever reason, other prominent figures in Vasily's family, such as his cousin and sister, are never mentioned when discussing his family in the film. Vasily is depicted throughout the movie as having not much interest in politics, and is shown as sort of being exploited and fed words by the Soviet top brass, with it eventually leading to this outburst showing his disliking of the image of him created by the Soviet media here.
You have to stop writing about me. You've built me up and up into someone I'm not. I'm what you've made me. Nothing more.
In reality, Vasily made it clear throughout his life that he was a very politically aware, proud Soviet, who was an enthusiastic participant in the propaganda campaign around the success of him as a sniper. Prominently here and in a few other parts of the film, we see full-on T-34-85 tanks, which as earlier mentioned did not enter service until 1944, well after the Battle of Stalingrad was over. This section of the movie features a chemical factory, which is likely to be based on the Lazur chemical plant. The place is shown and said to be controlled by the Germans.
Tomorrow morning we're going to take back the chemical factory.
With another ridiculous unsuccessful Soviet charge attack taking place here, which did not happen in reality, as during this time in early November 1942, the area was still under the control of the Soviets, not the Germans. Here we see Vasily's All-Union Communist Party ticket, which states him having joined on the 4th of October 1942. By this time, however, Vasily was still a part of the Komsomol, which was the Communist Youth League. He did not become a member of the All-Union Communist Party until 1943. The document also shows that he was born on the 3rd of March 1915, when in reality he was born on the 23rd of March 1915.
They're saying Vasily is dead.
Vasily Zaitsev will never see his loved ones again.
Don't listen to them. It's just propaganda. He isn't dead.
The only evidence of a false report of Vasily Zaitsev's death was one that was said to have occurred during the final weeks of the Stalingrad battle, months after the early November date of these scenes. It seemed to have been a rumor that was started among the Soviets, likely after Vasily was badly injured in January of 1943, rather than it all just being a piece of German disinformation propaganda as the movie tries to depict it. On the walls of this Soviet war room around Kruschev are modern US and British defense maps that weren't available until around 1960. We can tell from the numbers on the squares. These are flight altitude clearances for jets. Also, you can see that the maps are in Roman letters. Soviet maps during World War II were in Cyrillic and they look differently. Vasily and Tanya Chernova did become lovers during the battle, but the love triangle between Vasily, Tanya and Danilov never happened. Judging from the general look of the place and specifically the appearance of the water tower, this railway area is likely inspired by the station Stalingrad 1, or is a fictionalized version of it. The actual station area had been under German control since late September, but the film treats it like it is still being fought over as we see our characters fighting here with soldiers' corpses still around the place. Not to mention that it was located very far away from the specific areas where Zaitsev actually fought in, like the Krutai Ravine and Red October factory sectors. Sasha Filippov was indeed executed by the Germans for espionage during the battle, but the film portrays it in a wrong manner. In reality, he was tracked down and captured by the enemy via the local police. He was then tortured and later executed in front of his mother behind the front lines. Also, the execution occurred on December 23rd, 1942, but the last date the movie showed us was November 5th. Sasha Filippov was honoured posthumously, and even awarded with the Order of the Red Banner in 1944, not matching with how Danilov describes him as a traitor after his death.
He's gone over to the Germans. He's betrayed his country. He's with the enemy now. He won't be coming back.
It is possible that Danilov is saying this as a white lie to try comfort Sasha's mother, but this would also not match with reality because, as just mentioned, Sasha's mother witnessed her son getting executed in reality. Tanya was actually badly wounded during the battle, but not by a mortar after helping a civilian evacuate as portrayed in the movie. In reality, she was injured during a mission to kill General Friedrich Paulus when one of her comrades stepped on a landmine near her. When Tanya was injured, Vasily was nearby and was actually the one who carried her to a military hospital, not Danilov or Sasha's mother. The stethoscope used to examine Tanya is a post-1960 style one. Stethoscopes during this time would have two separate tubings attached to the bell. In what is one of the most utterly ridiculous and illogical plot points in the whole film, Danilov is shown harshly condemning Vasily to the Soviet leadership.
To the proper military authority. I'm calling to the Commandant's attention the recent changes noticed in the attitude towards fighting of soldier Vasily Zaitsev. He has attempted on several occasions to escape his duties, voiced doubts on the chances of our victory, and made defeatist comments in public. The inexplicable duration of his duel with the Nazi sharpshooter can only be explained by his lack of belief in the communist ideal.
Before then denouncing his communist beliefs and sacrificing himself, all because he was upset that the Soviet ideology did not convince Tanya to let him seize her means of reproduction.
We tried so hard to create a society that was equal, where there'd be nothing to envy your neighbor. But there's always something to envy
in this world, even a Soviet one. There will always be rich and poor. Rich in gifts, poor in gifts, rich in love, poor in love.
This absolutely did not at all happen in reality, and just like with Kulikov, is also seen as quite disrespectful, as they are using the name and image of Danilov, a real person, to spread the filmmaker's own political views and depicting him as an absolute incel, when there is absolutely no evidence that the real Danilov shared any of these ideals or qualities. Although his narrative in this case is to be taken with a bit more of a grain of salt due to the most likely fictional existence of Major Konig, the real Vasily claimed that during this very final standoff with Konig's, Politruk Danilov was present alongside a still alive Kulikov, but he was only wounded by the enemy sniper, not killed.
Today, February the 3rd, 1943. Today, after 180 days of heroic combat in the martyred city of Stalingrad, and as a result of the valor and self-sacrifice of our soldiers, the commandant of our glorious Red Army received the unconditional surrender of the German fascist invaders.
The Battle of Stalingrad officially ended on February 2nd, when most of the remaining German forces in the northern pocket surrendered, not on February 3rd. Also, 180 days before this scene's date of February 3rd, 1943 would be August 7th, 1942. Most sources show that the Battle of Stalingrad begun either on the 17th of July, 201 days before this scene, when the Germans first reached the distant approaches to Stalingrad in the bend of the Don, or on August 23rd, 164 days before this time, when Stalingrad city was first bombed by the 4th Luftwaffe fleet. Neither of these match with the August 7th date indicated by the announcer in the film, however. A post-war 1948 Gaz-67B is seen here. In reality, Vasily Zaitsev was wounded in January of 1943, and by the time of the Axis surrender, he was still in hospital recovering from the effects, particularly temporary blindness that was caused by it, so his portrayal on this date with no signs of having any such injuries is wrong. Tanya never learnt about Vasily's survival until 1969. Until then, she thought he died during the war. In the words of Max Hardberger, the author of the foreword in the main English translation of Vasily's notes, quote, "We believe Zaitsev would have been appalled by this fiction and disgusted that his name has been associated with it." And on that note, we tally a total of 141 historical inaccuracies in Enemy at the Gates. Since this film is 131 minutes in total length, that works out to an average of about 1 inaccuracy every 56 seconds of runtime. For more, click on this video where we cover a video game that was unfortunately largely based on this movie, the original first Call of Duty. Massive appreciation to the integral help from our other researchers in our team, including FeReise, Munacho Inc, Davidson, and K-Nyne. And of course, thank you for watching. This has been the Frosty One, out.